Let's continue walking down the timeline of your life. You started feeling you were different from the age of 3, so much so that you started fearing that you would be killed for being different. You openly came out as gay at your dadi's insistence at the age of 20 because she feared that you might get a nani's insistence. I apologize. Because she feared that you might get abusive from the stress of having to hide your identity. She said, open up and life will happen. So you opened up and life happened. Let's talk about the weight of that decision. What was the sentiment like around homosexuality back in the 90s? We're talking 30 years ago. I'm assuming it's a lot more conservative. What was the perception for gay men in India and beyond? And with that in mind, was it a tough decision for you to make at that point to come out?
So I was living in New York City in 1990s, early 1990s, till when I came to India a few years ago. Manhattan is amazing as it is. It's a speck in America with incredible people, with brilliant ideas, with incredible freedom given to all, and acceptance and not just tolerance of the other. That wasn't the case in such aplomb in the early 1990s. But we were still talking about it. I lived in Greenwich Village. My then third lover was an activist, Ivy League grad, very successful, very connected in the LGBTQ community, having helped shepherd, found some of the most iconic LGBTQ NGOs of that time and still working today. So I had access, agency, I had a voice, I had support, I had network. So I had nothing to worry about in America being gay. What I did have to worry about was being the color I am, which was caramel colored. And when I'm clean shaven, I'm rather pale skinned. But I still looked Arab to people, or I looked to a Sabra, Jewish, Israeli Jew. And so as we are hating the Jews today because of what's happening in Palestine, I'm very sensitive to even the Jewish plight because I've been thought of as Jewish and I know what happens when people think somebody's Jewish. All of us are racist, and we're racist towards a lot of people. So, that's why I always tell people, if you've been on the receiving end of racism, be very mindful of protecting anybody being hurt because of it. So I've been called effing Arab, effing Israeli, Sabra, effing idolatrous Hindu, all kinds of things, effing faggot. India in the 1990s and 80s, when I was coming of age, 70s, 80s, because there weren't any icons that I could connect with, there wasn't any gay, overtly gay human being that was out and about and proud and making noise, I had nothing to fear. I was protected. I was safe. My mind was shackling me. My mind was afraid. It wasn't the actions of another that I was afraid of. It was my mind telling me you're an aberration. You're a different human being. I didn't have the words. When I was 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11-year-old, I didn't know gay. I didn't know queer. I just knew I was looking at men when men were looking at girls. I wanted to marry a man when the boys were wanting to date a girl. I wanted to be complete with a man in my arms, and they were talking about being complete with women. So I knew I was different, and I was my biggest fear, my biggest concern, my biggest doubter, hater, because I was afraid. Did the world make me afraid? Just nobody said. I'm very lucky that I was really never bullied in India. But my mind, as a human who was in his head a minority, doing something very different, that had no role models to look up to, I lived in fear. And then to make it worse, in Nagpur, where we lived for 3 years with my father as a bureaucrat being posted there, it's a small town in Maharashtra, I would see dead bodies going back and forth from a graveyard through the processions. The Mayyat jati hui dekhta tha. I used to see the bodies being carried on shoulders. And I would think I would be that person one day if somebody found out my secret. And so it was me. And nobody bullied me in India. In America, I realized it was a tale of two countries. When I was in San Francisco, New York City, parts of Atlanta, parts of Chicago, little bits of Minneapolis, mostly DC. When I was in these cities, I could be me. I could be looking Arab, I could be Hindu, I could be gay, I could be talking with my list. Nobody cared. mostly. But in these other cities, even if I went just 3 hours north of New York City, even in the year 2015, 20, I was a terrorist. I was a Jewish claw. They would, when I would go shopping, they would think I'm Jewish till I opened my mouth, and then the Indian accent would come out. I realized how we other everybody in America. And why? Because unlike the rest of the world, where people within 200-300 miles, you're in a new country, new language, new costume, new way of being, you are pushed into seeing the other as a human without, thorns in their head, horns on their head. That's what doesn't happen in America. And in America, you can live in a silo, live in a cave, live in the 17th century, 18th century, and be a major hater because you've never known anything else. So it was America where I had to protect myself and be worried. In India, I never had that concern. I've come back to a nation that's very different from when I left it, my motherland, India. And I see young kids that are so amazingly loud, vocal, showing off like peacocks, their identities, their pronouns, challenging a system. It's like New York was in the 90s and 2000s and even today. And I find it rather remarkable that we have so much ground we need to cover in India. We don't have Stonewall, we don't have Sheridan Square, we don't have GLAD and ACT UP, but we do have a population that's not afraid to speak up, speak out, dress up, dress out, and challenge the norm. And most often we get away with it. And each year we are growing as a nation. Remember, we're only 75 years old. America has a couple of centuries and more behind it in democracy and a young nation. We have the youngest, largest democracy of the world. So I think India has covered a remarkable distance.
Firstly, when you spoke about not having icons in India, I can completely understand. You had shared a story from the past, which I definitely want to highlight here. You had said that you had one day come across an ad in India today in which you'd seen a postage-sized picture of Rohit Pal. And just by looking at that small picture, your first thought was, Ye Mera Judwa Hai. And you called him up with the best icebreaker possible, saying, I'm not Jeffrey Dahmer, which is it's an endearing story to me of how you were able to find each other within this sea of masses. There's one thing I want to check with you is when you mentioned that in India, it was in the US where you faced bullying of some sorts and you had name calling, not in India. Your mother taught you this saying from William Edward Norris, which went something like this. If you your lips would keep from slips, 5 things observe with care, to whom you speak, of whom you speak, and how and when and where. This is a saying that I feel is not practiced that well in our community. There is this hanging sword over your head always, which is log kya kahenge. And this applies to not something as powerful as gender and identity, even things like profession, like, oh, engineering nahi karega, log kya kahenge, ye karne wala hai, arts mein jaane wala hai, creative field mein jaane wala hai. Can you linger on this? Was there any point where you felt like as a community, it was difficult for you to come out and be open about your identity?
Being that 14-year-old that Rohit Bal took into his arms and showed the world to, having parents who were very comfortable in their own skin by the time they birthed and brought of age 2 other children, I had freedom like nobody, I think. No, I had a remarkable life as a teenager. Nobody minding my business, nobody scrutinizing what I did, nobody caring as to what I was doing. They believed in themselves. My parents were philosophical, I think, at the core. I'm writing a column on, I began it today, I'll be ending it tonight. I write my columns normally in 35 minutes, 1,200 words. But I somehow was distracted and I couldn't finish it. And that column is on living with older people. And I grew up in a home with my grandmother was the matriarch of the family. But all the other cousins of her sisters, her siblings, my paternal grandmother's siblings, cousins, aunties, uncles, neighbors, whoever was sick in the community, neighborhood, family, my parents, my mother especially was taking care of them. And with all of these people that they were caring for and the kids that they had forgotten or deliberately were teaching us to observe these maladies and illnesses and the work being done by my mother selflessly for people who are often thankless. What that taught us at a young age was that life lives with or without us. A moment lost is a moment lost forever. We had to make the most of today, of this here and now, and not be obsessed and lost in the the grays of issues that were beyond our pay scale. So we understood, if you're sick, don't be lost to it. If you are being hurt, go beyond it. If you're being questioned, do your bit and leave the rest to Kesara. So I think a lot of it was this with Gudda and the entire fraternity of fashion and art in India, using me as the man who they would give, they would give agency to, who they would show a comfortable youth, who they would give access to, who they would protect from hate and bullying. I had a remarkable teenage years. I had remarkable comfort in being me, and I was able to come of age without, I think, too many scars. Did I miss out on many things? Of course I did. I never had sexual relations with any man with any success till I came to America. I thought in my head, because these people gave me so much, teenagers play, have fun. I didn't. And I fell in love with the first man that gave me some attention, who was an American curator living in Paris from New York City. I left India, moved to New York for him. My parents thought I was going to continue my education in the arts, but I went for an American New York Parisian. And I lived my part of the deal of moving to New York for him. He never did. He came, but we broke up. And that was my first romance, which I thought would have been my last. And so India for me, and society in India, and I can't think of anything that could have gone wrong. I was a very lucky kid. Is everybody in the world as lucky as I am? No. Are they as lucky in India? Not at all. People have very tough lives. But I had a much easier life, and somebody somewhere blessed me with good luck, with good people, with good parents, with good neighbors, with good elders, with destiny that just kept taking me forward without breaking me up too much. And the only demons that I ever had to fight were the demons of my own making, my own fears, my own small thinking. But when I would unshackle myself from my own chains, I would see a future that was bright and full of opportunities, bringing me hope, and I would move forward. So I think I've been very lucky. And not everybody has this luck. I think most people don't.